Welcome to the program. I am Amarachi Obani. Diplomatic Channel comes to you from the United States capital, Washington, D.C., where 49 African heads of state and government have for the past week been holding very crucial talks that concern the continent's young people and future generations. Now, as expected, thousands of journalists from across the continent have been covering the talks, navigating their way through various checkpoints and restricted access to find out what African leaders really hope to get out of the summit. Now, the magnitude of the summit is a first for African leaders meeting in the United States, but it's also a first for the Obama administration and the United States government. So let's begin with the first question that comes to mind. Why did African leaders come all the way to Washington? Africa is home to approximately 1.033 billion people in the world who live in 54 recognized sovereign states and countries. It has enormous resources including oil, diamonds, gold, iron, cobalt, uranium, copper, bauxite, silver, petroleum and cocoa beans, and also woods and tropical fruits. The exploration of these resources have presented the continent the opportunity of being the most coveted for many centuries. From the pre-colonial era to the period long after the independence of many of its countries, the attraction has always been access to these resources by many Western countries for development and economic growth. But the tide is changing. Africans are becoming more aware of their importance to the rest of the world, and instead of repelling interest, have encouraged them. And despite already existing partners in progress, such as China and Europe, Africa is making room for one more.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome...
At the first ever U.S.-Africa Leaders Summit, hosted by President Barack Obama, over 40 African leaders sat to discuss the new partnership proposed by the U.S. With the theme, Investing in Africa's Future, ringing through the U.S.-Africa Business Forum, the African Growth and Opportunity Act Ministerial, and meetings with U.S. and Africa's civil society, the U.S. government explained why this partnership will be a win-win on both sides.
We don't look to Africa simply for its natural resources. We recognize Africa for its greatest resource, which is its people and its talents and their potential. We don't simply want to extract minerals from the ground for our growth. We want to build genuine partnerships that create jobs and opportunity for all our peoples and that unleash the next era of African growth. That's the kind of partnership America offers.
When the United States is home to some of the most innovative and well-known and respected companies in the world, and when Africa is already home to some of the fastest growing economies in the world and new leadership that is anxious to grab the future, we have to do more together. We have to partner, which is the theme of this conference, to invest in the next generation, to create good jobs for young Africans, to build a stronger middle class, to provide families with clean power and clean water, to build societies where an open exchange of ideas and information are the defining hallmark.
Despite the millions of dollars pledged towards power and infrastructure development, Africa's two main challenges, leaders do not want the continent to be taken for granted.
To put our views to the United States that we would want the extension of a goal so that we could have a better kind of relationship between us. We now have an experience that we can discuss better as to what is it else that we need to do to better and consolidate and enhance our relations as the two. So it is, I think, an opportunity that came at an opportune time. And I'm sure we will, when we end this interaction, will be better placed to deal with our relations.
We need to continue building our capacities and strengthening our institutions to enable us avoid over-dependency that has been there for too long. But we have to avoid that by building capacities and cooperation and integration, people working together, so that we are able to own up to our mistakes, to our weaknesses, and own up to our solutions and contributing to our solutions, so that we can even tell our story.
During a press briefing at the end of the summit, President Barack Obama announced U.S. partnership with Africa in other areas, health and security.
The United States will provide additional equipment to African peacekeepers in Somalia and the Central African Republic. We will support the African Union's efforts to strengthen its peacekeeping institutions. And most importantly, we're launching a new African peacekeeping rapid response partnership with the goal of quickly deploying African peacekeepers in support of UN or AU missions. And we'll join with 6 countries that in recent years have demonstrated a track record as peacekeepers: Ghana, Senegal, Rwanda, Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Uganda.
This is not the first sort of meeting where African leaders gather to talk. Many times it's not the meetings, but implementation that end up being the challenge.
And we're looking forward to seeing all the great things that you do when you go back home. All right? Thank you.
And that brings us to the second question, which is a no-brainer. What's in it for the United States? Now, in the last 10 years or so, Africa has been aggressively courted by the UK and China. Only it seems Africa has been leaning more to China, which has provided more services costing less. But to the West, China's intervention in Africa should be respected, but must be checked.
Thank you, Mr. President.
That was one major question asked by journalists covering the summit.
Prime ministers and presidents.
And that is understandably so, because like it or not, China is a major competitor on the continent. Its annual trade with Africa stands at around $200 billion, and that's double the amount of trade the United States has with Africa. China has been engaged in an intensive campaign of visiting Africa. They have forgiven debts, granted billions in loans, sealed defense deals, and handed out generous aid packages, which has granted them more and easy access to Africa's natural resources. At present, there are more than 2,000 Chinese companies and well over 1 million Chinese citizens in sub-Saharan Africa. However, according to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, U.S. goods exports to sub-Saharan Africa in 2013 were $24 billion, up from 6.9% from 2012 figures, and up 250% from 2003. While U.S. goods imports from sub-Saharan Africa totaled $39.3 billion in 2013, a 20.8% decrease from 2012, but up 53% from 2003. That may not be much compared with China, but the United States argues that Africa should be wary of its biggest Asian ally.
Their deals are rarely transparent. There's little accountability. There are no foreign corrupt practices acts to ferret out corruption if there's there. They bring workers in from overseas. It's questionable as to whether they follow local labor and environmental practices and standards. And so accountability and transparency are issues that have to be taken into account. African countries achieved.
The U.S. says a summit in Washington is not about any competition. If anything, America respects China's presence in Africa, but presents why America makes a better partner.
The United States is in Africa, and United States business has been in Africa for some substantial period of time. The goal is to substantially broaden, expand, and deepen that relationship, that economic and commercial relationship, beyond where it has been over the last several decades.
Investing in Africa will create jobs in Charlotte, North Carolina, and expand the power supply in Ghana because of the $175 million deal signed by SEWW Energy to upgrade Accra's electricity grid, a direct result of our recent trade mission. Investing in Africa will support workers in California and strengthen the health of patients in Nigeria because of the MOU signed by Environmental Chemical Corporation to construct a state-of-the-art cancer institute in Ibadan. Investing in Africa will spur job growth in Cincinnati through Procter & Gamble's $300 million investment in a new manufacturing plant near Lagos. Because when P&G expands in Nigeria and elsewhere, it supports thousands of jobs at home.
African Growth and Opportunity Act and enhance it.
Of course, there are other trade allies for Africa, the European Union, India, even Brazil. And with the announcement of billions of dollars in new investments in Africa, it's left to be seen how much further American presence can be felt on the continent.